They called her the silent wife. For 18 months of the most brutal divorce New York high society had ever seen, Vivian never spoke a word in her defense. She let him take the house. She let him freeze the accounts. She even let him parade his mistress around Manhattan while the ink was still wet on the separation papers. Preston Calloway thought he had pulled off the perfect crime, shedding his boring wife to marry a supermodel, all while hiding millions in offshore assets. He thought he had won. But he forgot one thing. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's just the sound of someone loading a gun. And when Vivian finally walked into the Astor Plaza charity ball, she wasn't just wearing a dress to kill. She was wearing the one thing Preston had lied under oath about, the ring. The conference room on the 48th floor of the Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meager and Flom building in Manhattan smelled of stale coffee and aggressive cologne. Outside, the grey sleet of a February Tuesday battered the glass, blurring the skyline. Inside, the atmosphere was even colder. Preston Calloway sat at the head of the mahogany table, checking his Rolex Submariner for the third time in 5 minutes. He smoothed the lapel of his charcoal Tom Ford suit, a nervous tic he had developed recently. He looked across the table at the woman he had spent the last 12 years with. Vivian sat with her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing a beige cardigan that had seen better days and no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun. To anyone looking in, she looked defeated, broken. A woman who had aged 10 years in the last 10 months. "Mr. Calloway is a busy man," Preston's lawyer, a pit bull of a man named Richard Gecko, barked. "We've been going back and forth on the Hamptons property for 3 weeks, Mrs. Calloway. The offer is final. You get the lump sum of $500,000, and you vacate the premises by the 1st of the month. Preston keeps the Sag Harbor estate, the apartment on 5th, and the portfolio." Vivian's lawyer, a court-appointed generalist who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, sighed and looked at her. "Vivian, we could push for discovery. I still think the valuation on his venture capital firm is suspicious. We haven't seen the K-1s for the Cayman accounts." Preston stiffened. His eyes darted to Gecko. This was the danger zone. If she pushed for the Cayman records, the house of cards would collapse. He didn't just have money there. He had debt. Massive toxic debt leveraged against assets he technically didn't own anymore. He needed this divorce finalized today so he could marry Bianca. Bianca's father was the CEO of Rossi Shipping. That marriage was the merger that would save Preston's financial life. But he needed a clean slate to get the Rossi investment. "No," Vivian said softly. It was the first time she had spoken in an hour. Preston leaned forward, a predatory grin twitching at the corner of his mouth. "No?" "No discovery," Vivian repeated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She reached into a tote bag, a canvas grocery bag, Preston noted with disdain, and pulled out a cheap ballpoint pen. "I just want it over, Preston. I'm tired." "Vivian, are you sure?" her lawyer whispered urgently. "That is a pittance. You supported him through business school. You worked 2 jobs when Calloway Holdings was in the red." "I said I'm tired," she said, looking Preston dead in the eyes. Her eyes were usually a warm hazel, but today they looked like dull glass. "If I sign today, is it over?" "Truly over." "Immediately," Gecko said, sliding the heavy stack of documents across the table. "Irrevocable. No alimony, no future claims on Calloway Holdings or its subsidiaries." Preston watched her. He felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with contempt. God, she was pathetic. He remembered the woman he had married, sharp, funny, an art historian with a bright future. But he had crushed that out of her, year by year, with gaslighting and neglect. He had convinced her she was lucky to have him. And now, she was letting him walk away with everything. "Give me the pen," she said. The scratching of the pen on the paper was the only sound in the room. Scratch, scratch, scratch. She signed page after page. She waived her right to the 401k. She waived her claim to the jewelry collection, including the engagement ring he had demanded she return last week, claiming it was a family heirloom. It wasn't. He needed to sell it to pay a gambling debt to a man named Sergey in Brighton Beach. When she finished, she stood up. She didn't look at the lawyers. She looked at Preston. "You have everything you wanted, Preston," she said. "It's just business, Viv," he said, shrugging, already mentally texting Bianca the good news. "You were never cut out for this life anyway. You're too soft." "Soft," she echoed. A strange, microscopic smile touched her lips, gone before he could truly register it. "Goodbye, Preston." She walked out of the glass doors and into the elevator. As the doors closed, Preston let out a whoop of joy. "Done! Gecko, you're a genius!" "She's an idiot," Gecko laughed, packing his briefcase. "She could have taken you for half. We got away with murder." Preston pulled out his phone and dialed Bianca. "Baby, pack your bags. We're going to St. Bart's. The witch is gone." Down on the street, Vivian stepped out into the freezing rain. She didn't open an umbrella. She walked 2 blocks to a waiting black sedan with tinted windows. The driver, a large man with a military bearing, opened the door for her. "To the airport, madame?" the driver asked. Vivian slid into the leather-back seat. She pulled the hair tie out of her hair, letting the dark locks fall around her shoulders. She took a wet wipe from her purse and scrubbed her face. Not to remove makeup, but to wake herself up. The dullness in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp intensity. "No, Alfred," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the tremble she had feigned in the office. "Take me to the vault at the Sovereign Bank on Wall Street. I need to make a deposit." She pulled her phone out. It was a burner phone. She dialed a number saved simply as the architect. "It's done," she said into the phone. "He signed the indemnity clause?" "He did," a British voice answered on the other end. "He thinks he's free. He has no idea that by signing that waiver to keep the Cayman accounts hidden, he also waived his right to contest the ownership of the shell company that just bought his debt." "Good," Vivian said, staring out at the rain-slicked streets of the city she used to rule from the shadows. Let him have his week in St. Bart's. Let him propose to Bianca. I want him to feel safe. I want him to feel invincible. And the gala? "The gala is in 3 months, Vivian said. "Ensure my invitation is handled. And prepare the vault. I'll be wearing the Red Queen." There was a pause on the line. "The Red Queen?" "Madame, that diamond hasn't been seen in public since the Romanovs fell. Preston thinks it was lost in the fire of '98. "Preston thinks a lot of things," Vivian said, watching the Skadden Arps building disappear in the rearview mirror. "He thinks I'm poor. He thinks I'm stupid. And he thinks he owns this city." She leaned back, closing her eyes. "He's about to find out that he's just been living in it, rent-free. And the landlord just came to collect." 3 months later. May. The scent of peonies and money filled the air of the penthouse suite at the Plaza Hotel. Preston Calloway stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting his white tie. He looked good. At 42, he had the jawline of a movie star and the tan of a man who spent his weekends on yachts. But inside, Preston was sweating. "Babe, which earrings? The chandeliers or the studs?" Bianca Rossi walked into the room, and as always, she sucked the oxygen out of it. 24 years old, leggy, and dripping in Versace. She was the trophy Preston had destroyed his marriage to win. She held up 2 pairs of diamond earrings. "The chandeliers," Preston said distractedly. "They catch the light better for the paparazzi." "You seem tense, P," Bianca said, pouting as she clipped the diamonds on. "Daddy is going to be there tonight. You know he's excited to announce the partnership." "I know," Preston snapped, then softened his tone. "I know, baby. It's a big night. The Astor Plaza charity ball isn't just a party. It's the night. If I don't close the investors from Dubai tonight, the expansion plans for Callaway Tech are on hold." He couldn't tell her the truth. There were no expansion plans. There was just a gaping $10 million hole in his operating budget. He had been borrowing from Peter to pay Paul for 6 months. He had liquidated the Sag Harbor house, the one he fought Vivian for, just to pay the retainer for his PR firm and the lease on this penthouse. He needed Bianca's father, the formidable Donato Rossi. To sign the check tonight, the $20 million investment into Callaway Tech was the only thing standing between Preston and federal prison for wire fraud. "Well, don't worry," Bianca cooed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Everyone knows you're the golden boy. Look at you. You're free of that boring old nag. You have me. And you're about to be the CEO of the year." She glanced at her left hand. It was bare. "Although," she whispered, tracing his jawline, "I still feel naked without a ring, Preston. You promised." Preston flinched. "I told you, the jeweler in Zurich is custom-cutting the stone. It takes time, Bianca. You don't buy a ring like that off the shelf." That was a lie. He had been blacklisted by Cartier, Tiffany's, and Harry Winston. His credit was shot. He had tried to buy a decent 3-carat solitaire last week, and his Amex Black card was declined. The humiliation burned his gut like acid. He told her it was a security hold, and walked out. "I know," she sighed. "But tonight, there's a rumor, you know." "What rumor?" Preston checked his phone. Another urgent email from his CFO. "Delete." "About the gala," Bianca said, stepping into her heels. "The board of the Astor Foundation has a new chairwoman. No one knows who she is. They say she bought her way onto the board with a $50 million donation. Anonymous. Probably some Saudi princess or a tech widow from Silicon Valley." Preston dismissed. "Who cares? As long as the champagne is cold and your father is happy." "They say she's unveiling a piece of jewelry tonight," Bianca continued, scrolling through page 6 on her phone. "Something legendary. The theme of the gala is hidden treasures. Everyone is trying to guess what it is." Preston put on his jacket. He didn't care about jewelry. He cared about survival. "Let's go," he said. "The limo is downstairs." The Astor Plaza Charity Ball was the apex of New York social life. It was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, specifically in the Temple of Dender. The massive sandstone temple was bathed in purple and gold light. The air buzzed with the chatter of senators, celebrities, and hedge fund managers. Preston worked the room like a shark. He shook hands, flashed his $1 million smile, and laughed at jokes that weren't funny. He kept a tight grip on Bianca's waist, using her beauty as a shield. "Preston, my boy." The booming voice belonged to Donato Rossi. The shipping magnate was a short, barrel-chested man with eyes like flint. "Donato," Preston said, shaking the older man's hand firmly. "You look fantastic. And you look like a man who's ready to sign papers." Donato laughed, slapping him on the back. "I've had my lawyers look over the Callaway Tech proposal. It's ambitious." "Fortune favors the bold," Preston recited his favorite mantra. "Indeed. We'll make the announcement after the speeches," Donato said. "But first, I want to meet this mysterious chairwoman. Have you seen the program?" Donato held up the velvet-bound itinerary. 20 course. Welcome address by the chairwoman of the Astor Foundation. 21 trucks, the unveiling of the Star of the South. Star of the South? Preston frowned. The name triggered a distant memory. A headache began to throb behind his eyes. Some diamond, Donato said. Supposedly it hasn't been seen since the 1800s, worth more than this entire building. The lights in the great hall suddenly dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd of 5,000. A spotlight hit the podium in front of the Temple of Denda. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed, "please welcome the new chairwoman of the Astor Foundation, Ms. Vivian Archer." Preston froze. He dropped his champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the silence, but he didn't hear it. Vivian Archer. That was her maiden name. A collective gasp went through the crowd. From the shadows of the temple, a figure emerged. It was Vivian. But it wasn't the woman in the beige cardigan. It wasn't the boring wife who clipped coupons. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged every curve of her body, a body that looked leaner, stronger than he remembered. The dress was off the shoulder, featuring a plunging neckline that stopped just short of scandal. Her hair was loose, cascading in dark, glossy waves. Her makeup was fierce, blood-red lips and smoky eyes that scanned the crowd with the imperiousness of a queen looking at her subjects. But no one was looking at her face. They were looking at her neck. Resting against her skin was a necklace of platinum and onyx, and suspended from it was a diamond so large, so violently red, it looked like a burning coal. Preston stopped breathing. It wasn't just a diamond. It was the Callaway red. The stone his great-grandfather had mined in South Africa. The stone Preston had told everyone was stolen in a burglary 5 years ago to collect the insurance money he had used to pay off a blackmailer. He had sold that stone on the black market to a fence in Macaw. How the hell did she have it? Vivian stepped up to the microphone. She didn't smile. She looked out into the darkness, and even though there were thousands of people, Preston felt her eyes lock onto his, like a laser sight. "Good evening," her voice purred through the speakers, rich and confident. "They say that the truth is like a diamond, hard, cold, and impossible to destroy, no matter how deep you bury it." Bianca tugged on Preston's sleeve. "Preston, isn't that your ex-wife? I thought you said she was a frumpy librarian." Donato Rossi was staring at Vivian, entranced. "That," the billionaire whispered, "is the most magnificent woman I have ever seen." Preston felt the room spinning. He needed to get out. He needed to run. But his feet were lead. "Tonight," Vivian continued, touching the massive red stone at her throat, "we are here to talk about hidden treasures, and the price we pay to keep them." She smiled, and for the first time in his life, Preston Callaway was truly, terrifically afraid. The applause that followed Vivian's speech was thunderous, a stark contrast to the silence that had defined her existence for the last 2 years. She walked down the steps of the Temple of Denda with the grace of a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. Preston Callaway felt like he was drowning on dry land. He gripped Bianca's arm so hard she winced. "Ow! Preston, stop it!" Bianca hissed, pulling away. She smoothed her Versace dress, eyeing the crowd. "Why is everyone looking at her? She's old." "She's 38, Bianca," Preston muttered, his eyes fixed on the red diamond burning at Vivian's throat. "And right now, she's the most powerful woman in this room." "I want to meet her," Donato Rossi announced, finishing his scotch in one gulp. "No," Preston said too quickly. "Donato, really, we should go check on the Dubai investors. They're by the bar?" "Nonsense," Donato boomed, already moving through the crowd. "I want to know how a woman comes out of nowhere to chair the Astor Foundation, And I want a closer look at that stone." Preston had no choice but to follow. He felt like a prisoner walking to the gallows. As they approached, the crowd naturally parted for Donato Rossi, the billionaire shipping magnate. Vivian was surrounded by a phalanx of admirers, senators, heiresses, and tech moguls. But when she saw the trio approaching, she raised a hand, silencing the man she was speaking to. She turned. Her eyes, cool and amused, landed on Preston. Then they slid to Bianca. Finally, they rested on Donato, with a warmth that was entirely calculated. "Mr. Rossi," Vivian said, extending a gloved hand. "I was hoping you would attend. Your work with the Oceanic Cleanup Initiative is something I've admired from afar." Donato took her hand and kissed it, a rare gesture of old-world respect from the ruthless businessman. "You know who I am, Miss Archer. But I confess, you have me at a disadvantage. My future son-in-law here tells me you used to be married." Vivian's gaze flicked to Preston. It was like a physical blow. "Preston," she said softly, "you look flustered. Is the air conditioning not working in the penthouse?" "Vivian," Preston croaked. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the arrogance that usually fueled him. "You look expensive. Who's paying for the dress? The settlement money wasn't that generous." It was a clumsy jab, meant to humiliate her. The circle of socialites around them went quiet. Vivian didn't blink. She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that sounded like champagne bubbles popping. "Oh, Preston, you always did have a terrible head for figures. That's why your company is currently leveraged at 6-1, isn't it?" Preston went pale. That figure, 6-1 leverage, was a secret. It was buried in the books that only he and his CFO saw. "I don't know what you're talking about," Preston snapped. "Introduce me to your benefactor." "Who bought you the necklace?" Bianca chimed in, sensing an opening. "Yes, it's a bit gaudy, isn't it? Red diamonds are so theatrical." Vivian turned her full attention to the young model. She didn't look angry. She looked pitying. "You must be Bianca," Vivian said. "Preston has excellent taste in aesthetics, if not in longevity. And as for the necklace," she reached up and touched the cold stone. "No man bought this for me. I bought it myself." "Impossible," Preston blurted out. "That stone is the Callaway Red. It was stolen 5 years ago from my safe. It's a police matter." He had said it loud enough for the people around them to hear. He thought he had her. He thought he could accuse her of possessing stolen property. Vivian stepped closer to him. She invaded his personal space, the scent of expensive tuberose and danger enveloping him. "Stolen?" she whispered, loud enough only for Preston, Bianca, and Donato to hear. "That's funny, because I have the receipt from a private auction in Macau. The seller was a man named Mr. Smith. But the bank account the money was wired to? It belongs to a shell company called Apex Holdings. Does that sound familiar, Preston?" Preston stopped breathing. Apex Holdings. That was his offshore account, the one he used to hide the insurance payout after he faked the burglary of the diamond. If she had the receipt proving he sold the diamond he claimed was stolen. She had proof of insurance fraud, wire fraud, perjury. "You wouldn't," Preston hissed, sweat trickling down his temple. "I would," she smiled. "And I have. But don't worry, I haven't sent the file to the district attorney yet. I'm waiting for the right moment." She turned back to Donato, who was watching the exchange with narrowed, calculating eyes. He sensed the weakness in Preston. He smelled the blood in the water. "Mr. Rossi," Vivian said, linking her arm through the older man's. "I have a private table on the balcony. I'd love to discuss your shipping routes. I think I can help you with those tariffs in the South China Sea. I have some friends in the Trade Ministry." "I would be delighted," Donato said, turning his back on Preston without a second glance. "Preston, entertain Bianca. I'll find you later." "Donato, wait! The contract!" Preston pleaded, stepping forward. Donato paused and looked over his shoulder. "We'll discuss the contract tomorrow, Preston. I prefer to do business with men who don't sweat through their tuxedos." Preston stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom as Vivian walked away with his investor, his savior, and his dignity. As they walked away, Bianca tugged on his arm. "Preston, do something. She's stealing my dad." Preston looked at his fiancée, then at the retreating figure of his ex-wife. The silent wife had just nuked his life in 3 minutes without raising her voice. "She's not stealing him, Bianca," Preston whispered, terror gripping his heart. "She's hunting. 18 months earlier. The concept of revenge is often misunderstood. People think it's a crime of passion, a scream in the night, a slashed tire. But Vivian knew the truth. True revenge is an engineering project. It requires blueprints, permits, and a solid foundation. It had started on a Tuesday, 3 months before she asked for the divorce. Vivian had been cleaning Preston's home office. He never let the maids in there. He said he had sensitive client files. But he was sloppy. Arrogance always makes men sloppy. He had left his gym bag on the leather armchair. Vivian picked it up to take out his sweaty clothes, and a phone fell out. It wasn't his iPhone. It was a cheap, plastic burner phone. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. Vivian turned it on. There was no passcode. She sat on the floor, surrounded by the smell of old leather and betrayal, and scrolled. It wasn't just Bianca. There were others before her. But worse than the infidelity were the texts to a number labeled Gecko. Moved the 2M to the Cayman shell. She doesn't suspect a thing. Valuation of the company is cooked. If she asks for half, she gets half of nothing. The insurance payout for the red clears tomorrow, tax-free. Vivian didn't cry. She sat there for an hour, the light fading in the room, watching the dust motes dance in the air. She felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't heartbreak. The heart had broken years ago. This was clarity. She took photos of every text with her own phone. Then she put the burner back exactly where she found it. The next day, she didn't call a divorce lawyer. She called a number she found on a hidden forum for forensic accounting. She met him in a diner in Queens, far away from the Upper East Side. He introduced himself only as Alaric. He was a small man with thick glasses and a sweater that looked like it had been knitted by a blind grandmother. He looked harmless. He was the most dangerous man Vivian would ever meet. "You have a problem, Mrs. Calloway," Alaric said, stirring his tea. He didn't look at the photos she had printed out. He just looked at her. "I have a husband who is stealing my future," Vivian corrected. "I want it back." "No," Alaric said gently. "You want to hurt him. If you just wanted the money, you'd hire a lawyer and subpoena these records. You'd get a settlement. But you're here, in a diner that smells like grease, talking to a man who technically doesn't exist. You don't just want the money. You want to take his pieces off the board." Vivian looked at his reflection in the napkin holder. "He made me feel small for 12 years. He made me doubt my own sanity. He treated me like furniture." She looked up, her eyes hard. "I don't just want a divorce, Alaric. I want an eviction. I want him to feel what it's like to have nothing." Alaric smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Then we have work to do. But you have to follow my rules. Rule number 1, you must become a ghost." "A ghost? You must be boring," Alaric explained. You must be defeated. You cannot fight for the assets. You cannot scream. You must let him think he is winning every single step of the way. Narcissists like Preston Calloway cannot resist a victory lap. We will let him run until he is so far ahead he doesn't realize he's run off a cliff. And so, the silent wife was born. For a year, Vivian played the part. She wore the beige cardigans. She stopped wearing makeup. She let Preston insult her intelligence at dinner parties. Every insult was fuel. Every time he called her soft, she transferred another $5,000 of her own inheritance into a crypto account Alaric had set up. Then came the divorce proceedings. The moment in the lawyer's office where she signed the waiver was the hardest performance of her life. She had to sign away her rights to the known assets to trap him with the unknown ones. By signing the agreement that stated she accepted the disclosed assets as the full extent of his wealth, she triggered a specific clause in New York state law regarding fraudulent concealment. If she could prove later that he hid assets, the entire agreement would be void, and the penalty usually involved awarding 100% of the hidden assets to the victim. She didn't want half, she wanted it all. But the masterstroke was the ring. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Alaric called her. "The Calloway Red," Alaric said. "It's resurfaced." "Where?" "Macau, a private black market auction. Preston sold it to a fence, but the fence is spooked. He wants to unload it fast." "How much?" Vivian asked. $3 million. Cash. Vivian didn't have $3 million liquid, but she had access. "Alaric," she said, pacing her small rental apartment in Brooklyn. "The Cayman accounts, the ones Preston thinks are secure." "Yes? He gave me the password once, 5 years ago, when he was drunk. He thinks he changed it. But I saw him typing it last month. He just added a 1 at the end." "Risky," Alaric warned. "If we touch that money, he gets an alert." "Not if we route it through the shell company he's trying to buy," Vivian said. She had learned fast. "Preston is trying to buy Apex Holdings to launder his new investor money, right?" "Correct. So let's become Apex Holdings. Let's buy the company before he does, using his own offshore debt leverage, and then we use his own money to buy the ring." There was a silence on the line. Then a low chuckle. "Mrs. Calloway," Alaric said with genuine admiration. "That is diabolical. You're going to use his hidden slush fund to buy the evidence of his own insurance fraud and wear it to the gala he's sponsoring." "Exactly," Vivian said. "He won't be able to say a word. If he claims the ring is his, he admits to fraud. If he says nothing, I wear his legacy around my neck." "I'll initiate the transfer," Alaric said. "Welcome to the game, Vivian." Present day. Vivian stood on the balcony of the Met, the cool night air hitting her face. Below her, the party raged on. She touched the red diamond. It felt heavy. She had won the first battle. She had humiliated him. She had stolen his investor. But the war wasn't over. Preston was a cornered rat, and rats bite. "Miss Archer." She turned. It was Donato Rossi. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne. "I sent Preston away," Donato said, handing her a glass. "The man is a fool. He spent 20 minutes trying to explain why his company's burn rate is so high. I stopped listening after 5. "He's desperate," Vivian said, sipping the wine. "Desperation is a cologne that doesn't mask well." "Indeed." Donato leaned against the stone railing. "But I didn't come here to talk about Preston. I did a little digging while I was in the men's room. My team tells me that Apex Holdings, the company that just bought the majority share of the Astor Foundation's debt, is registered to a trust." Vivian stiffened slightly. Donato was smarter than Preston. Much smarter. And, Donato turned to her, his eyes twinkling. The trust lists you as the beneficiary. You didn't just donate to the gala, Vivian. You own the debt of this venue. You effectively own the stage we are standing on. Vivian met his gaze. There was no point in lying to a predator of his caliber. I like to control my environment, Donato. I can see that. He clinked his glass against hers. I like a woman who plays the long game. Preston is asking me for $20 million to save his company. I haven't signed yet. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. What would you do? Donato asked, his voice low, if I gave that investment to you instead? 2. Whatever venture you are planning next. Vivian smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had worn all night. I'm planning a hostile takeover, Donato, she said, of Callaway Tech. Donato threw his head back and laughed, a rich, hearty sound. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Tell me more. Just then, a commotion erupted from inside the ballroom. A glass shattered. Shouting. Vivian turned. Through the glass doors, she saw Preston. He was red-faced, screaming at a waiter. But he wasn't looking at the waiter. He was looking at her through the glass, and in his hand he held his phone. He raised it, pointing the screen at her. A text message notification pinged on Vivian's clutch. She opened it. It was from Preston. I know about Alaric, and I know where he lives. Come to the cloakroom, now, or the little man bleeds. Vivian's blood ran cold. She had underestimated him. She thought he was just a fool. She forgot he was a criminal. Is everything all right? Donato asked, seeing her expression change. Vivian snapped the phone shut. The mask was back in place. Excuse me, Donato, she said coolly. I have a loose end to tie up. She walked back into the ballroom, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble. The game had just turned violent. The cloakroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a cavernous space, smelling of cedar, expensive fur, and damp wool. It was quiet here, the roar of the gala muffled by thick velvet curtains. Vivian walked in. The attendant was missing, likely paid off. Preston was waiting by the rows of long coats. He was pacing, his hands twitching at his sides. When he saw her, he stopped. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger. It was the frantic, cornered look of a feral animal. You look beautiful, Viv, he said, his voice trembling with a manic energy. Really, money suits you, though I suppose it's my money. It's the settlement you agreed to, Preston, Vivian said calmly, clutching her purse. Inside, her phone was recording. Where is Alaric? Preston laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Alaric? You mean the little hacker in Queens? I have a guy, Sergei. You remember Sergei, don't you? The one I owed money to? I told him Alaric was the one holding up his payment. Sergei is on his way to Queens right now with a tire iron. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't flinch. She had anticipated this. She had to trust the protocol. Call him off, Vivian said. Give me the ring, Preston demanded, stepping closer. He held out a shaking hand. Give me the ring, and give me the access codes to the Cayman Shell Company. You transfer the money back to me, right now, and I call Sergei. You're delusional, Vivian said. You can't just undo this. The FBI is already building a file on the insurance fraud. If I give you the ring, you'll just destroy it and say I stole it. I will say you stole it, Preston shouted, his composure shattering. He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. His grip was painful, bruising. You stole it from my safe. That's the story. You're a bitter ex-wife who stole a family heirloom. Who are they going to believe? Me, the CEO of Callaway Tech, or you, the nobody? Let go of me, Preston. Not until I get what's mine. He twisted her arm. Vivian gasped, dropping her clutch. It spilled open on the floor. Lipstick, the burner phone, and a small, folded piece of paper. Preston looked down at the paper. He kicked the purse away and squeezed her wrist harder. The codes. Now. You didn't check the address, did you? Vivian asked, her voice straining through the pain. Preston froze. What? Alaric, she gritted out. You sent your thug to the address in Queens. Alaric hasn't lived there for 3 months. He lives in a secure compound in Connecticut, paid for by the fees he earned exposing frauds like you. The only thing waiting for Sergei in Queens is a SWAT team. Alaric flagged the IP address of your tracker yesterday. Preston's face went slack. He released her wrist as if burned. You're lying. I don't lie anymore, Preston. I learned that from you. Lying is too much work. She rubbed her wrist, checking the red marks forming on her pale skin. But you just admitted to conspiracy to commit assault and extortion, and... She pointed to the ceiling. And you did it in a room with a security camera. Preston looked up. A small black dome stared back at him from the corner. No audio, Preston whispered, trying to reassure himself. Cameras don't have audio. True, a voice said from behind the rack of mink coats. But I do. Preston spun around. Emerging from the rows of furs was Bianca. She wasn't crying. She looked horrified, yes. But mostly she looked disgusted. She held her phone up. The screen was recording. Bianca! Preston choked. Baby, what are you doing here? I told you to wait by the bar. I followed you, Bianca said, her voice shaking. I wanted to see you tell her off. I wanted to see you win. She stepped closer, the phone still pointed at his face. But you're broke. You're broke, Preston? No, baby. It's a liquidity issue. You said you were buying me a custom ring in Zurich, Bianca said, her voice rising to a screech. But you're trying to steal one back from your ex-wife? You told me you were a billionaire. I will be. Once your father signs, my father. Bianca laughed, and it was a cruel sound. My father isn't going to sign anything. I just live-streamed this entire conversation to our family group chat. Daddy heard everything. The insurance fraud. The hitman in Queens. The fact that you're leveraging his money to pay off your debt. Preston backed away, looking between the two women. The silent wife and the trophy wife. He had pitted them against each other, assuming they would fight for his affection. Instead, they were looking at him with the same expression. Absolute revulsion. Bianca, please, Preston begged, reaching for her. I did it for us. I needed the capital to give you the life you deserve. I have a life, Bianca spat, and I don't need a fraud to pay for it. She turned to Vivian. For a moment, the two women locked eyes. There was no warmth there, but there was a truce, an acknowledgement. Nice necklace, Bianca said stiffly. Nice recording, Vivian replied. Bianca turned on her heel and stormed out of the cloakroom. Preston stood alone with Vivian. He was shaking. His empire had just evaporated in 10 seconds. It's over, Preston, Vivian said quietly. Go home. Preston looked at her, his eyes hollow. Then a dark, dangerous resolve settled over his face. He smoothed his suit jacket. He fixed his tie. No, he whispered. It's not over. Donato hasn't seen the video yet. He's old school. He doesn't check group chats. Preston, don't... I can still fix this, he muttered, his eyes wide and unseeing. I just need to sign the papers. Once the ink is dry, he can't back out. Possession is 9/10 of the law. He pushed past Vivian, knocking her shoulder, and ran back toward the ballroom. Vivian watched him go. She picked up her clutch and the folded piece of paper. She sighed. Men like him never know when to fold, she whispered to the empty room. She took out her phone and dialed Alaric. He's going back to the floor, she said. Initiate phase 3. Copy that. Alaric's voice came through, crisp and clear. The projector is ready. It's showtime, Mrs. Calloway. It's Miss Archer, she corrected. And Alaric, make it loud. The grand ballroom was reaching a fever pitch. The lights were dimmed, bathing the Temple of Dender in a soft, golden glow. The auctioneer was just finishing the bidding for a vintage Aston Martin. Preston Calloway sprinted through the crowd, ignoring the glares of the people he bumped into. He was sweating profusely, his hair disheveled. He spotted Donato Rossi standing near the stage, holding a glass of scotch, looking at his watch. "Donato!" Preston gasped, skidding to a halt next to the billionaire. "Donato, I have the papers right here. I have a pen. Let's just sign. We don't need lawyers for a gentleman's agreement." He fumbled inside his jacket pocket, pulling out the folded contract he had been carrying all night. Donato looked at him slowly. The older man's face was unreadable. He didn't seem angry. He seemed disappointed. "Preston," Donato said heavily, "you are sweating." "It's just the heat," Preston lied, clicking the pen. "Here, just on the dotted line. This secures the 20 million, and I transfer the equity to Rossi Shipping immediately." "Where is Bianca?" Donato asked, not taking the pen. She's in the powder room," Preston stammered. "She's not feeling well. But she wants this, Donato. She wants us to be partners." Donato stared at him for a long, agonizing second. Then he reached into his pocket. Preston thought he was reaching for a pen. Instead, he pulled out his phone. "My daughter is not in the powder room," Donato said, his voice dropping to a growl. "She is in a taxi. She sent me a video, Preston. A very interesting video." Preston's blood froze. Before he could speak, the sound system of the ballroom screeched with feedback. The crowd winced, covering their ears. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed, though it sounded different, hurried, confused. "If we could turn your attention to the main screen, we have a special addition to the program." The massive screen behind the Temple of Dender, which had been displaying images of charity work in Africa, flickered. It went black. Then a document appeared. It was a bank transfer receipt, high resolution. Sender, Apex Holdings, Cayman Islands. Recipient, Preston Calloway. Amount, $300,000 memo. Insurance settlement. Red Queen. Claim. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People were squinting, confused. Then the image changed. It was a photo of a police report filed by Preston Calloway, claiming the Red Queen diamond had been stolen in a burglary, dated 5 years ago. The image changed again. A new receipt, dated 3 months ago. Seller, Mr. Smith, Macau. Buyer, Apex Holdings. Item, red diamond, 30 carats. Price, $3,000. The murmurs turned into gasps. Even the most uneducated socialite in the room could do the math. Preston had claimed the diamond was stolen, collected the insurance money, hid the money in a shell company, and then, unbeknownst to him, his own shell company had bought the diamond back. The final image appeared on the screen. It was a live video feed. It showed the balcony above the stage. Vivian Archer stood there. The spotlight hit her. The Red Queen diamond at her throat sparkled with a fire that seemed to accuse everyone in the room. She leaned into the balcony microphone. "Preston," her voice echoed through the hall, godlike in its amplification. "You told the police this ring was stolen. You told the insurance company it was gone forever. You told me it was a family heirloom you couldn't afford to lose." She paused, letting the silence stretch. 5,000 people held their breath. "So, I have a question," Vivian said. "If it was stolen, why is there a receipt showing you sold it to a fence in Macau?" On the screen, a new document flashed up. It was the smoking gun Alaric had found. A notarized bill of sale with Preston's signature, selling the ring to the black market dealer. Preston stood frozen next to Donato. He felt the eyes of the room burning into him. The hedge fund managers, the politicians, the rivals he had sneered at for years. They were all staring. Donato Rossi sighed. He took the contract from Preston's shaking hand. "You know, Preston," Donato said, his voice loud enough for the nearby circle to hear, "I don't mind a man who takes risks. I don't even mind a man who bends the rules. But I cannot abide a man who gets caught." Donato tore the contract in half, then in half again. He let the pieces flutter to the floor like confetti. "You are finished," Donato said. "Donato, wait! It's a fabrication! She photoshopped it!" Preston screamed, grabbing Donato's arm. Two large security guards materialized out of the crowd. They weren't museum security. They were Rossi's personal detail. They grabbed Preston by the arms and hauled him back. "Get your hands off me!" Preston shrieked, kicking and flailing. "Do you know who I am? I am Preston Calloway." "Mr. Calloway?" A new group of men entered the circle. These men wore windbreakers with 3 yellow letters on the back, FBI. The lead agent, a weary-looking man named Agent Miller, flashed a badge. "Preston Calloway, I'm arresting you for wire fraud, insurance fraud, and filing a false police report," Miller said, snapping handcuffs onto Preston's wrists. "And thanks to your ex-wife, we also have the audio of you threatening a federal witness 20 minutes ago. That's going to add another 10 years. Preston looked up at the balcony. Vivian was looking down at him. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She just looked done. Like a gardener who had finally pulled a stubborn weed. "Vivian!" Preston screamed as the agents dragged him away, his tuxedo jacket tearing at the shoulder. "Vivian, tell them we can make a deal. I'll give you half. I'll give you everything." Vivian reached up and unclasped the Red Queen necklace. She held the heavy, blood-red stone in her hand. She leaned into the mic one last time. "You can't give me everything, Preston," she said, her voice soft, but carrying to the back of the room. "Because you have nothing left." She dropped the necklace. The crowd gasped as the multi-million-dollar diamond plummeted from the balcony. It fell through the air, spinning, catching the light. It landed in Donato Rossi's empty champagne glass, which was sitting on a high-top table with a loud clink. It didn't break. It just sat there, drowned in the dregs of warm alcohol. Vivian turned and walked back into the shadows. On the floor below, the flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. Preston was dragged out the double doors, his screams echoing off the ancient Egyptian stones. The silent wife had spoken, and she hadn't needed to raise her voice to bring the house down. 6 months later. The silence in the Sotheby's auction room on York Avenue was different from the silence Vivian had lived in for 2 years. That silence had been a cage. This silence was electric with anticipation. "Lot 404, the auctioneer announced, his voice clipping the air. "The Red Queen. A 30.2-carat fancy red diamond. Provenance, the Calloway collection." Vivian sat in the back row, dressed in a white power suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. Next to her sat Alaric, looking less like a hacker and more like a proud uncle in his tailored suit. "The bidding starts at 4 million, the auctioneer intoned. Paddles shot up instantly. The room was a shark tank, and the blood in the water was red diamond dust. 5 million, 6 million, 8 million to the gentleman on the phone. "You could have kept it," Alaric whispered, leaning in. "Technically, since you bought the debt of the shell company that owned it, it was yours. You could have worn it to the grocery store just to spite him." Vivian watched the numbers climb on the digital board. "It's too heavy, Alaric. It carries Preston's greed and 12 years of lies. I don't want that weight around my neck. I want it converted into something useful. Sold! The gavel cracked like a gunshot. For $12.5 million to the buyer from Zurich. Vivian let out a breath she felt she had been holding for a decade. She didn't feel rich. She felt light. That's a lot of scholarships for the Astor Foundation, Alaric noted with a smile. It is, Vivian agreed, standing up. Come on, I have a company to buy. While Vivian stepped out into the crisp autumn sunlight, Preston Calloway sat in a room with no windows. The Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan was a grim reality check. Preston wore an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, and his hair, once his vanity, was shorn close to his skull. He sat at a metal table in the common room, staring at the TV mounted in the cage on the wall. The chyron on CNBC read, "Calloway Tech Assets Liquidated." But the main story was an interview with Bianca. She sat on a white couch, looking tearful, but beautifully lit. "So you had no idea about the fraud?" the host asked gently. "None," Bianca sobbed, dabbing her eyes. "I was a victim, just like the investors. Preston manipulated me. He was a monster who used my father's name to build a house of cards." Preston gripped the table until his knuckles turned white. "Liar," he whispered. "You spent the money. You wanted the lifestyle." On the screen, Bianca held up a hardcover book. "Diamond in the Rough, My Escape from the Calloway Fraud. I wrote this to warn other women," Bianca said, her voice strengthening. "And half the proceeds go to charity." Preston screamed, throwing his plastic lunch tray at the screen. It clattered uselessly against the bars. As the guards dragged him back to his cell, the crushing truth hit him harder than any gavel. He wasn't even the villain in the story anymore. He was just a footnote in theirs. "The lobster is excellent," Donato Rossi said, seated at a private table at Le Bernardin. "We aren't here for the lobster, Donato," Vivian said, taking a sip of sparkling water. "No." Donato slid a thick leather folder across the table. "The acquisition is complete. My team bought the scraps of Calloway Tech this morning. The patents, the server farms, the algorithms. We got them for pennies on the dollar. And the rebrand? Ready. We're calling it Phoenix Systems. And as agreed, the majority shareholder is the anonymous trust you set up." Vivian ran her finger over the documents. It was perfect. Preston had built the engine of a Ferrari, but was too busy painting it gold to drive it. Now, she owned the engine. "You realize," Donato mused, "that you just pulled off the most Machiavellian hostile takeover in New York history. You took his company, his reputation, and his freedom. You didn't just beat him. You erased him." "Preston thought power was noise," Vivian said calmly. "He thought it was shouting and showing off. He didn't understand that real power is silent. It's the current that pulls you under before you know you're drowning." Donato raised his glass. To silence. To silence. That evening, Vivienne stood in her living room. The fireplace crackled softly. She held a beige cardigan in her hands, the itchy, shapeless thing she had worn the day she signed the divorce papers. It smelled of old fear and submission. She tossed it into the fire. She watched the wool catch, curling into black ash. The symbol of the silent wife vanished up the chimney in a wisp of smoke. Her phone buzzed. It was Alaric. "Board meeting Monday at 9 a.m. You're sitting at the head of the table. What do you want your title to be?" Vivian typed her reply. "Don't call me chairwoman. Call me the architect." She poured a glass of Pinot Noir and sat in the armchair. For the first time in years, she wasn't plotting. She wasn't calculating. She was just existing, listening to the fire. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was a symphony, and she was the conductor. The silent wife was dead. Long live the Queen. And that is how you serve revenge: cold, calculated, and absolutely profitable. Preston thought he could bury Vivian, but he forgot that she was a seed. She turned her silence into a weapon and his own greed into her empire. It really makes you think, how often do we mistake quiet people for weak people? Vivian proved that while the loud ones are talking, the quiet ones are planning. I'd love to know your take. Would you have burned the cardigan or kept it as a trophy? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate justice, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, stay silent, stay sharp, and watch the throne.